Hi, everyone. Thanks for this episode, Nick Egan Times. On this episode, we have an amazing guest. We have the extremely gifted and highly intelligent Robert J. Sawyer. Robert is an incredible best-selling science fiction author. Robert has had a remarkable and illustrious career. Robert has written a tremendous 24 novels to date. And Robert is one of only 8 writers to win all 3 of the world's top sci-fi novel awards. And Robert has overall won a significant amount of awards in his professional career. Welcome to the talented Robert, and thanks for coming on the podcast.
Oh, it's my absolute pleasure, Nicholas. Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, let's start off. Tell me, how's it all been going?
Well, things have been going spectacularly. Thank you. It's actually 25 novels now. The newest one came out last month, and I had a cross Canada book tour, which went very, very well. The reviews have been coming in very positively. The book is called The Downloaded, and life is good. Things are going very well. Thank you.
Wonderful. All right, let's jump straight into it. Let's start off. Tell me about the new book.
The Downloaded is about 2 different groups of people, a group of astronauts who are preparing to go to Alpha Centauri, the closest star system to our own, and a group of prisoners who are serving 20-year prison sentences. Now, what do these 2 groups have in common? They've both chosen or required to freeze their bodies cryogenically and upload their consciousnesses to a quantum computer. The astronauts, of course, because although Alpha Centauri system is only 4.3 light years away, we can't go anywhere near the speed of light. It will take 500 years for their ship to get there. So they're in hibernation. The prisoners are told, well, we'll upload your consciousness into a quantum computer. We'll speed up the clock speed so that your 20-year sentence will absolutely, every single second of it, seem like 20 years to you, but only 10 months will pass in the outside world. So you can go back and join your family. Your kids will still be kids. Your spouse might still be around. Your job might not be, if it's gone, at least your skill set won't be hopelessly obsolete. And after they both uploaded in preparation for their journeys, civilization falls, those 500 years pass, and they thaw out and are the only survivors, a handful of murderers and a handful of astronauts trying to rebuild civilization.
Wow, that's really fascinating. All right, tell me, with writing sci-fi, how did that start for you professionally? Like, how did you actually get into that specific genre?
So I got into science fiction because it was what I loved to do. I loved to watch, loved to read. Excuse me. It was a great part of my pleasure reading. And one of the very first science fiction books I read was by a guy named Alan E. It's pronounced Nurse, but it's spelled Nourse, Alan E. Nurse. And at the beginning of the book, and I read this book when I was 12, he had an essay before I'd even read the book. He had his introduction about the joy of writing science fiction. And so, for most people, it's a journey. They start reading books when they're a kid and only vaguely have a sense that some human being had actually written them. And then only later on get a sense that I could be one of those human beings too. I was jump started by this essay. The guy said, I love doing it. You can do it. This is a great life. And so I pursued it as the only thing I really wanted to do. I've been very lucky that it worked out to be a career, but I chose it because I loved it, science fiction. And I got into the field the standard way in my industry, which is you start by writing short stories for a few pennies a word in hopes of attracting the attention of a literary agent, which that worked for me, and that the literary agent will attract the attention of a publisher. Again, that's how it happened. And here we are a couple of dozen books later.
I agree. And with the process, I guess, in brief, how do you draw your inspiration? How is that process? I guess how does that transpire? How do you actually get the ideas? Like, yeah, it's incredible.
So the ideas aren't just there in the air waiting for you to pull them out. You have to go digging for them. It's like prospecting for gold. If it was just lying there, gold would be worthless, right? You have to go digging and hunting for it. And for me, that's in the research. I'm a science fiction writer. So I do an enormous amount of reading in popular science and also, science technical stuff, but the popular science that anybody could read, the David Attenborough, the Carl Sagan, the Neil deGrasse Tyson, that kind of work. And looking, sure, for intriguing facts, but facts that suggest a dramatic situation. One of my short stories, for instance, I was reading a book about space travel, and it said one line in it. It said, the first people that we send off to the stars are going to be met by their own descendants when they arrive at the destination, because, of course, they'll go in a very slow ship. And in the time that passes, much faster ships will be developed. So when they get there, their kids or their grandkids will be waiting for them when they finally get to the. So what a mind-blowing idea. But that was just in reading a technical book about the colonization of space. So I wrote that story, you see. So it's all research for me. And I think it's true no matter what you choose to write. A mystery writer is constantly reading true crime. A legal thriller writer is constantly going over court transcripts to see an intriguing move that somebody's done, looking at trial results and so forth. I think for every good writer, it comes from the research.
That's impressive. All right. What motivates you daily?
What motivates me? Well, first, it's how I make my living. So I am motivated by money. There's no shame in that. Everybody who does something for a living does it that way. But for that reason, for instance, I gave up writing short stories. I said they only sell for a penny or few awards. You were kind enough to mention that I'd won the top awards in the field. The top award is called the Hugo. And at the World Science Fiction Convention, they give the Hugo Awards. Well, the Hugo Awards are named after men who've established the first science fiction magazine, 1926. All right, so that's 96 years ago, Hugo Gernsback. And at the Hugo ceremonies a few years ago, Spider Robinson was the master of ceremonies. Welcome to a ceremony named for an award, named for a man who invented a per word pay rate we still use. So there's no money in writing short fiction. The only sensible reason to do it is either because you really love that art form or because you want it to parlay into a career in writing novels. That's where the real success is. Now, that said, I'm not a mercenary. I am an artist. I care about doing really ambitious, hard, difficult work. Difficult for me, I mean. Hopefully it's a breeze for you to read, but I want it to be a challenge, that I've done something. It's a little bit of a tour de force, a little bit of a risk for me when I pull this one off. I don't know if I can or not. And I write because science fiction is a great vehicle for social commentary. I got into it because of H.G. Wells, who was writing about, he's not in a time machine. He's not writing about travel to the future. He's writing about the British class system. War of the Worlds is about the evils of British colonialism. And, when I was a kid, and I still love it, the original Planet of the Apes, which was all about race relations and the fear of nuclear war. Science fiction is a way to talk about hot button issues with mask, metaphor, disguise, so that people don't go in with, to use a science fictional metaphor, their deflector shields on, preventing you from getting at them.
Incredible. How long does it take to write a book?
When I was in my heyday, my first novel came out in 1990. My first 20 years, I was doing a book a year. And that would be 3 or 4 months of the research and planning, 2 or 3 months of writing the first draft, 3 or 4 months of doing revisions. And then there's a little bit of time left over at the end of the year that you're using to promote the previous year's book. These days, I've slowed down a lot. That economic incentive isn't there anymore. I'm comfortable. And I so much enjoyed the research part that, for instance, the downloaded, it didn't require all that much research. I knew what I was talking about when I set out. But the one before that was called the Oppenheimer Alternative. And it's about the Manhattan Project. And I set about doing the book, and it came out, I'd sold it. It came out before Christopher Nolan had even announced that he was going to make this movie with Cillian Murphy about Oppenheimer. But I spent an entire year, instead of just my usual few months, a full-time 40-hour weeks doing the research for that book, because I love it. It's just, for me, I write the novels to monetize all the research that I do. I have to somehow make a living. I can't just constantly go down Wikipedia or Google rabbit holes searching one thing after another that, whatever catches my fancy. I have to somehow make money off of it. So I gather it all together into hopefully a dramatically interesting pile and call that my next novel.
That's great. What What's the best piece of advice you would give to a young aspiring author that wants to pursue, I guess, your path or your career?
I am a huge believer in writing, and I learned this, by the way, from Isaac Asimov, the great Russian-born American science fiction writer. I got to interview him when I was 25 years ago, 25 years old, long time ago now. When I got to interview him, I was doing some interviews for the CBC, the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, and I asked him that question you just asked me, and he said, "So long as I make myself and my readers happy in that order, I'm happy." And that was the key. You have to write for yourself. I don't mean you write, things that are completely self-indulgent, power mad fantasies about yourself or anything, but you write things that you want to read. And if you, and really for so many of us writers, that's how we got started. We went into the bookstores and we'd read all of, in my case, the Asimov, the Clark, the Larry Niven, the writers that I liked. There was nothing else for me to read, but I wanted to write more. I didn't want to write robot stories in Asimov's universe or known space stories, which is Larry Niven's universe. I want to make my own universe, write my own stories. And that's the number one thing is don't look around to see what's trending, what's the hottest topic, because everybody else is looking for the same thing, right? If they're doing that, if they're letting the market lead them, everybody, oh, right now, let's all write about climate fiction, climate change fiction. That's the hottest category right now. And by the time you write yours, the category, we won't have solved the problem that gave rise to the category, climate change, but the category will be tired and the audience and the world will be on to something else. So don't chase a trend, find something that really interests you, tell that story with passion and conviction, and trust that there are enough people in this globe with 8 billion of us on it who will share your interest for the work to find a home.
That's wonderful. What do you see being the biggest challenge, or what has been the biggest challenge for you as an author?
The biggest challenge for any author, beyond what I just said or related to it, is finding that audience. I started in 1990, my first novel, first short story in 1980. So it was only one way, traditional publishing. And you had to try your luck with, the publishing houses in New York or London or Toronto or Sydney, the big English language publishing capitals, and hope for the best. It's a slow but steady process. As my friend Dean Wesley Smith, another writer of my vintage, actually is even about 10 years older than me, said, that's how you do it. You build it a book at a time, a reader at a time, but it's hard. These days, the sad truth is you can't just show up with a good book. You have to show up and essentially drag an audience in with you. If you're going to a traditional publisher, they want to know how many followers you have on Instagram or on Facebook or on Twitter or X now or Blue Sky or wherever you're hanging your hat online. And if you don't have an online presence, if you're not out there making yourself known, you won't find an audience. I say that very deliberately. You don't go out there and just say, hey, buy my book. Here's my book. I got a new book. Buy my book. I want your money. Read my book. All I want you to do is read my book. I don't care what kind of book you like. You're going to like my book. Give me your money. That is a complete recipe for failure. Hey, here's an interesting cartoon that made me laugh this morning. Oh, I got an interesting thought. This is the kind of stuff I do about original Star Trek series. All right. Hey, everybody, here on my Facebook wall, new episode of Star Trek Discovery dropped this week. What did you all think? Let's have a conversation. And you get people to be intrigued by who you are intellectually and what kind of emotional presence and, like, hey, this is a guy I'd like to spend some time with. Well, sorry, you can't come over to my house for 8 hours, but you can buy my book and spend 8 hours in my company in the comfort of your own house. And that's how you build it up piece by piece.
That's great insights. Thanks for sharing. When you look back at your career over time, what are your fondest memories, or those pinch me moments where you just go, wow, this has happened, or this is incredible?
I was very lucky that in 1995, so it was only 5 years after my first book came out, I published a novel called The Terminal Experiment about a biomedical engineer who finds scientific proof for the existence of the human soul, a big, meaty idea. And I was lucky because it won the Science Fiction and Fantasy Writers Association's Nebula Award, essentially the Oscar of the science fiction field for Best Novel of the Year. And the ceremony was on the Queen Mary, which is this luxury liner that's permanently docked Long Beach, California, Los Angeles. Wonderful old ocean liner, beautiful ceremony. But I won the award, and my editor at the time at HarperCollins said to me, Rob, you've just gone overnight from being a promising newcomer to being a bankable, established name. So that was the moment right there. And it was, I knew, my career had started, my first couple of books, first 5, I guess, had not made a huge splash. And I knew I had to write something ambitious. Didn't have to be big. Don't equate a fat book with necessarily an ambitious book. There's lots of big, heavy, completely generic, completely imitative, epic fantasy novels out there, or big space operas. Write something that's got a meaty topic to it. And for me, that was what it did. When I started doing something where people said, the human soul, you can't prove that scientifically. That's a matter of faith. Oh, what if we did prove? What would that do to the abortion debate? What would that do to euthanasia? Will we still harvest hearts from beating heart donors if we don't actually know what the dividing line between life and death is? And people immediately gravitated to the book because it gave not me just something to tell them, but them something they wanted to turn and talk to somebody else about. And that was kind of when I realized that that's the key to engaging fiction, to engaging an audience and building an audience, is to make sure that the first thing they do when they finish your book is not say, what's on TV? Or I guess I got to find something. I got to talk to somebody about this. I'm excited. I'm angry. I hate what this guy wrote because I totally disagree with him, or I love what he wrote. That was the key for me, and the nebula that night when I realized, yes, that is the formula for success.
That's superb. What do you want your legacy to be?
What do I want
what your legacy to be? Your legacy.
Oh, my legacy. Sorry. What do I want my legacy to be? It's a very interesting question. Because most writers, of course, end up not really have much of a legacy. William Shakespeare had lots of contemporaries. And if you scratch your head long enough, you can maybe name 1 or 2 of them, but most of them are utterly forgotten. I want my legacy to be this, that I was the guy who managed to take both parts of the word science fiction in equal measure. There are lots of science fiction writers who don't understand science, but can tell a good yarn. There are lots of science fiction writers who do overly understand science and give short shrift to the human and forget that they're supposed to be telling an engaging story. I've always, science is 7 words, fiction is 7 words, equal weight. I've always tried to have a really good extrapolation of what we know about science into what plausibly might be, and wrap it up in heart-wrenching or heartwarming human interest stories. If I had to express it another way, I say that my legacy will hopefully be that he was the guy of, an exemplar of the best of us who combined the intimately human with the grandly cosmic.
Definitely. Your career speaks for itself. So yeah, it's truly remarkable, your career.
Thank you. I've been very lucky. I work hard and I've got some talent, but there's also an awful lot of luck. And everybody who goes into this field, any field of writing, it's a crapshoot. You're taking you're taking your best shot, hoping for the dice is going to come up the way you want. For some of us, they do. For some, they don't. The only part you can control is how hard you work and your perseverance. The luck will either come or it won't. I was lucky that the luck came. I can point to 4 or 5 times that I got a lucky break in my field.
Incredible. It's just incredible. What are your passions and hobbies aside? Obviously, you love writing books. What do you like to do?
So it's funny you should ask about my legacy, right? Because I'm at that stage in life. I had turned 64 a month and a half ago, where most people would be thinking about retiring. And people say, "Oh, writers, you don't get to retire. You have to keep writing. I want more stories from you. Don't you stop." Or a creative individual never slows down. But if I was, a chimney sweep or a high school teacher, or even just any kind of regular journalist writer, everybody'd say, "Oh yeah, here's the gold watch. It's time to hang up your hat." And the reason I bring that up to contextualize my answer is I always have to answer that question with, well, were I to have the time, I think my hobbies might be, because this has been all consuming, this career. 44 years as a published science fiction writer, 34 years, over a third of a century as a full-time science fiction novelist. So the things that I enjoyed before I started all that, I love paleontology. I love collecting fossils. I love studying and reading about dinosaurs. I love old movies, and I love, now every year I get older, the movies I love also get even more back in the past, right? For instance, my all-time favorite movies turn out, many of them to be black and white. Casablanca, The Maltese Falcon, Doctor Strangelove, right? I mean, that's how old the old films I was a buff of, when those films were only 20 years in the past, 30 years in the past. Now they're, of course, ancient films, but I still love them. So old movies, I don't read that much science fiction anymore. I read an awful lot of mystery and crime fiction, and curling up on the couch with a really good mystery novel, and getting out when I can to do some fossil hunting, or I also am a very desultory amateur astronomer, getting out to do some stargazing. Those things are good hobbies for me. And I used to be captain of a pub league trivia team, and I still love trivia. Every night, I watch Jeopardy, the trivia game show, and I would love to. I'm good enough. I'm even probably contestant quality good enough in some categories, but I don't have a broad enough intellectual base to be a Jeopardy champion. I know that. I have a friend who is a 5-time champion. And from back in the day when you only could win 5 games before they retired you. And so trivia, I would get back into a pub trivia league, I think.
Incredible. With science fiction, how far does it date back, the actual genre?
I'm sorry.
With science fiction, how far does it date back, the actual genre? How far, when was it, I guess, first created?
I'm slightly hard of hearing. It's my fault, not yours.
The genre science fiction, when did it first get created?
Oh, that's easy. Okay, sorry. Forgive me.
Sure.
This genre of science fiction actually is unlike almost most other categories of writing. We can point to a particular writer and a particular work, and it's not what people initially think of, but when you make the case for it, they'll go, oh yeah, you're right. And that work is, and it came out in 1818, Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. You think about it. Frankenstein was the first novel ever in which a scientist, Dr. Victor Frankenstein, was undertaking an experiment. The scientific method, it had never been written about before in fiction. He had been watching the real life work being done, in even the previous century, in the 1700s, by an Italian anatomist named Galvani, whose name lives on in our word galvanize. When you say, I've been galvanized to do something, what does that mean? Well, Galvani used to put electricity into amputated frogs' legs and watch them twitch. He said, oh, there's some relationship between electricity and life. I don't know what it is, but so what's the experiment? Well, if you can take a dead frog's leg and reanimate it, maybe if you took enough dead human parts, put them together and had enough electricity, not the little zits that you can get, with, rubbing things together for static electricity, maybe lightning, maybe you could reanimate a dead body. And so Frankenstein is, in fact, the first novel ever about the scientific method. And it was created by a woman and over 2 centuries ago.
Wow. It's amazing. If you were 18 again and you could go back personally or professionally and change anything, what would you change?
There's a couple of stupid business decisions I made. There are a couple of times where I was ill-advised by agents, and there's, the Mamas and the Papas, a rock group from the 60s when I was a little kid. They have one of their lyrics goes, agents can't be trusted. There's a lot of truth in that for anybody who's dealing in anything, sports, anything, where you have somebody who's between you and the people who are paying you. Be careful, because their interest may be put ahead of your interest in various things. That said, I would say relax. It's going to work out. If my when I started writing science fiction and sending out stories when I was 17 and had no reason to believe that I was ever going to be more than a modest, any success at all that I ever even get published. If I could have known then that it was going to turn out okay, I think I would have relaxed. I wouldn't have slowed down. I would have been less driven. I don't mean relax and not do stuff. I mean relax and not fret so much. There's the famous saying from Rene Descartes, cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. And one of my characters in one of my books, Quantum Night, says, no, no, no. It's solicito ergo sum. I fret, therefore I am. And I spent far too much of my life fretting over things that I didn't have to.
Wow, thanks. That's great. Thanks for sharing. Robert, thanks for coming on the podcast. I do appreciate it. It's incredible your career, everything you've done, and even now, obviously, writing a new book. Yeah, it's significant, and thanks for coming on.
My absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for asking me.
You're welcome. Thank you.